In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
To the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Okay. Now we put our hands on our hearts, and we all face the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The under God was added during the Eisenhower.
Under God was added during the Eisenhower administration. And you know, it's very interesting that it should have been, because President Eisenhower was perhaps, for most people living today, considered to be, his era was considered to be the height for America. After that time, we had the dreadful 1960s when the evil hippies destroyed the wonderful America that had been, and everything was awful. Well, Mr. Eisenhower was an extremely interesting man. He was very, very, very much for adding under God. And yet, his own attitude toward religion, which in its way sort of epitomized the typical American view of things, is interesting to quote. Now, I read to you a quote from a book called The 50s, which is nevertheless quoted in Puritan's Progress, which is a 5-volume history of the United States from the Catholic viewpoint. Listen very carefully to the following words. The central symbol of the nation's political piety was the president, Mr. Eisenhower, himself. Though not an official church member until after his election, Eisenhower more than made up for this with his frequent religious pronouncements. Ike's faith was a simple one. It was just faith. Our government makes no sense, he declared during the 1952 campaign, unless it is founded in a deeply felt religious faith, and I don't care what it is. One more time, he said, our government makes no sense, he declared during the 1952 campaign, unless it is founded in a deeply felt religious faith, and I don't care what it is. On another occasion, he told the people, though, quote, I am the most intensely religious man I know. That does not mean I adhere to any sect. In still another speech, the president assured Americans that this nation was the mightiest power God has seen fit to put upon his footstool. In 1954, Ike told the nation to spend July 4th as a day of penance and prayer. He himself went fishing in the morning, played 18 holes of golf in the afternoon, and bridge at night.
I really like that one about we're built based on faith, but he doesn't care which one.
Yeah.
That's sort of like saying, one of my organs must be beating, but I don't care which one.
My lungs.
My liver.
That's well. And the other fun part about that, though, is that for those of us who are Catholic, we will notice at the same period of the 1950s, there was an increasing acceptance of other faiths as our equal. As Richard Brookhiser put it in The Way of the Wasp, of course the Catholic Church was still the one true church, but so were all the others. Now, it would be unfair, not to say unkind, not to say awful, not to point out that our current problems in the church and in the state, obviously, developed directly from just that attitude. You know, I like Perry Mason and Della Street as much as anybody. And
probably more than anybody.
Probably more than most. Maybe more than anybody. But you know what? The 50s were not, in terms of our religion, in terms of our country, although they look better perhaps than what we have now, they really weren't much good. They look better in the sense that if you've got the tertiary stage of syphilis, the secondary stage looks wonderful. You don't have bits falling off. You don't have holes drilled into your head. It's great. Absolutely great. But you know what, ladies and gentlemen? You've still got the disease. Now we come to an important question. And the question is this. Did our beloved republic become corrupted through the work of evil men, the way the John Birch Society would tell you? Or was there something wrong from the very beginning? There's a question, ladies and gentlemen. Now, before we go further, I think that Professor Biersach has uncovered some basic principle he wishes us to move with.
Well, actually several. And you've been doing such a good job of warming everybody up.
And loves me them basic principles.
And then I have to cool everybody down with a glass of ice water in the face. But,
I could read more Eisenhower.
Of course, well, now let's see. Pope Leo XIII, in 1899, wrote a particularly important letter to a certain cardinal in the United States.
Not Cardinal Gibbons of Baltimore.
Cardinal Gibbons of Baltimore.
Ooh, slippery Jim Gibbons, look to your ribbons.
And what very famous book did Cardinal Gibbons arrange for us to have?
The Faith of Our Fathers and the Baltimore Catechism. Not to say the Baltimore Catechumen, who was someone else entirely.
Well, anyway, if any of you have a copy of the Sources of Catholic Dogma, and you happen to look up the paragraph number 1967, which
the doctrine of love.
That's not the year it was written. It's just a curious coincidence that it's paragraph 1967.
Jerry Cardinal Garcia co-signed it.
The Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band had nothing to do with this encyclical. But this encyclical, Testem Benevolentiae, CA, was written specifically to Cardinal Gibbons. And I understand he tried to block its passage across the Atlantic.
Yes, he did. Cardinal Gibbons was an interesting chap, and not averse to underhanded steps, as it was his buddy, Archbishop Ireland of St. Paul, Minnesota, managed to get the language, A, get the language softened, and B, have all references to anyone in particular cut out. But even with those two things done, you'll see it's not a pleasant document.
Yeah, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read a little bit now and then a little bit later and a little bit after that, sort of pepper the discussion. But the first paragraph's kind of interesting. It says, and remember, this is Pope Leo XIII talking, the basis of the new opinions which we have mentioned is established as essentially this. In order that those who dissent may more easily be brought over to Catholic wisdom, the Church should come closer to the civilization of this advanced age, and relaxing its old severity, show indulgence to those opinions and theories of the people which have recently been introduced. Moreover, many think that this should be understood not only with regard to the standard of living, but even with regard to the doctrines in which the deposit of faith is contained. For they contend that it is opportune to win over those who are in disagreement if certain topics of doctrine are passed over as of lesser importance, or are so softened that they do not retain the same sense as the Church has always held. Are you following this?
Yeah.
How often have you heard Father Feelgood say, well, we have to explain the Catholic faith in light of modern thinking, or we have a new sense of things now? Before we started tonight, I was reading this and I was thinking, we are really in the fallout after this, like this nuclear blast in slow motion. And here we had a pope. This was dated 1899. Okay, in 1899, the pope was saying this is a completely horrible attitude, that we should in any way soften the presentation of the Catholic faith to accommodate those who are outside the faith. In other words, we have to. What he's saying is we have to present the faith as what the faith is.
Humph.
Let it stand on its own, let people accept it or not, but we don't water it down so that it's easier to accept, because there's a little secret about the Catholic faith. It isn't easy to accept some of it.
You mean
it's hard
a
to
hard
swallow.
saying,
It's a hard
and
saying.
then he walked no more with him? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, that's
that kind of
biblical. We
So-
Catholics don't read the Bible.
And, of course, as I said, we'll refer to this from time to time, but I got, those really cold chills reading this when I realized that this warning just got wiped aside, and here we are approaching 100 years later. We're just 2 years shy of the 100th anniversary of this document.
Do you think the National Conference of Catholic Bishops will have a special observance of the centennial?
I don't think so.
No?
I don't think so.
Well, just a thought.
Okay.
Well, what makes it particularly interesting is that there, Pope Leo XIII was simply repeating one more time the unchanging teaching of the faith. Error has no rights. But the faith in America has always had a little tiny problem. And that is that its very foundation was bound up with a revolution. And that revolution, we all remember the 4th of July, don't we? Remember with the fireworks and all that? Does anyone recall what the 4th of July celebrates? The Pilgrims killed a turkey, and no, that's
the opening of
Independence.
The Red Devil Fireworks
The opening
Company.
of the Red Devil Fireworks Company. Yes, that's just what it is. No, it was, of course, the national feast day of our independence. Now, that Declaration of Independence in Congress, July 4th, 1776. I'll just read you the opening part. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. It's too bad the Confederates didn't think about that. Well, sorry. We hold these truths, and people get very excited about this, and Father John Courtney Murray, who was the great author of the Religious Liberty to create Vatican II, he wrote a book called We Hold These Truths. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Well, of course, we know that last part isn't true, or the IRS would have gone down in flames years ago. But what we do know, however, is that the whole question of nature and of nature's God, and of being endowed by their Creator, that has made generations of Catholics feel that somehow the Declaration of Independence is an intrinsically Catholic document. Inevitably, people will say, they'll mistake the bit about the inalienable rights and all that kind of stuff, and they will mistake it as part of the Constitution. Well, it's not. There's no mention of God in the Constitution. In fact, the major difference between the preamble of the Confederate Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, upon which the Confederate Constitution is based, is that they actually have the line in there, those rotten Southerners put in the line, invoking the blessings of Almighty God upon ourselves and our posterity. But that's neither here nor there. There is, if you look very closely in the Declaration of Independence, after this wonderful opening, a long list of the terrible, 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 awful things that King George was supposed to have done to the poor dear colonists. Well, among these is the following. Where is we? He attacks him, quote, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. Ladies and gentlemen, that sounds awful, doesn't it? Can anybody tell me what that neighboring province was? No? What's that?
Mexico.
No, not Mexico. Not Mexico. Well, close when you said Canada. Quebec. What they have reference to is the Quebec Act of 1774, which gave the French Canadians the right to their religion, their language, and their laws. This freedom from the terrible, terrible penal laws of England against Catholics is what the Founding Fathers referred to as the free system of English laws. Now, lest you think that I'm simply being a little bit of an alarmist about this, I got a few neat little quotes for you. This is from Volume 2 of Puritan's Progress. It doesn't concern anything about Eisenhower, so you Eisenhower fans will find the first volume a bit of a washout. But he quotes here the Continental Congress in September 5th, 1774, drew up three addresses. Now, the first one was written to the people of England. And again, this was in opposition to the Quebec Act. Quote, that a British Parliament should ever consent to establish in that country, Canada, Quebec, a religion that has deluged your island in blood and dispersed impiety, bigotry, persecution, murder, and rebellion through every part of the world.
They're describing Catholicism?
Uh-huh.
But that's what Protestantism did.
Ooh. Well, you ever read communist propaganda?
Yeah. Well.
Now, at the same time, well, not quite, 5 days later, 5 days after this wonderful little note to the people of England about this religion of impiety, they addressed the people of Quebec. What is offered to you by the late Parliament? Liberty of conscience in your religion? No, God gave it to you. We are too well acquainted with the liberality of sentiment distinguishing your nation to imagine that difference of religion will prejudice you against a hearty amity with us. Well, what's even worse than that was the Suffolk Resolves. Now, you may have heard, you know where Boston, Massachusetts is, yeah. And it's in the county of Suffolk. A little while after these letters came out, both of which, by the way, fell into the hands of Bishop Briand, who was the Bishop of Quebec. He got the entire text of both letters. And interestingly enough, he threatened to excommunicate any priest who should cooperate with the Congress. But a little while afterwards, the Suffolk County Committee of Correspondence gathered together in what were called the Suffolk Resolves. And those of you who are old enough to have had history at school will have heard of the Suffolk Resolves. This is what Article 10 says. That the late Act of Parliament for establishing the Roman Catholic religion in that extensive country, now called Canada, is dangerous in an extreme degree to the Protestant religion and to the civil rights and liberties of all Americans. And therefore, as men and Protestant Christians, we are indispensably obliged to take all proper measure for our security. Lastly but not leastly, Alexander Hamilton. You know him. He's on our $10 bill. He,
Saint Hamilton.
Saint Hamilton.
Yeah.
Saint Alexander the Great. He wrote a pamphlet called "Full Vindication of the Measures of Congress," and he includes the phrase, this little helpful phrase: "The affair of Canada is still worse. The Romish faith is made the established religion of the land, and His Majesty is placed at the head of it. The free exercise of the Protestant faith depended upon the pleasure of the governor and council. They may as well establish popery in New York and the other colonies as they did in Canada. They had no more right to do it there than here. Your lives, your property, your religion are all at stake." Now,
he was not a nice guy.
Well, none of them really were. None of the founding fathers were all that nice, at least not the ones who count. Who counts? Well, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. These are the ones who counted. Now, as you know, the revolution succeeded. These United States became a free and independent republic. And the gentlemen who brought about the revolution became the new rulers. That's what happens when you have a revolution. The people who win run the show. See? If you don't believe me, ask Lenin. He can tell you all about it. Now, what were their views of Catholicism and of Christianity after the revolution? Now remember, the revolution could not have succeeded had it not been for the intervention of France and Spain. And remember that it was because of that intervention that although the majority of Catholics, regular Catholics, not their leadership like Charles Carroll and all that, but the regular rank and file were loyalists. Nevertheless, thanks to the French and Spanish intervention, the penal laws were dropped after the revolution. And this, by the way, shows you a little bit of insincerity too, because remember, it was one of the reasons cited for having the revolution in the first place was the dropping of the penal laws. So, well, whatever. So the question is, after this wonderful experience of being helped out by France and Spain, did this alter the founding fathers' view of Catholicism? Well, should I read some more Eisenhower?
Sure.
Well, I don't have any Eisenhower.
Oh, okay.
But instead, I'll read Benjamin Franklin.
Saint Ben.
Saint Ben, who was responsible for the appointment of our first Archbishop of Baltimore. A few weeks before he died, Benjamin Franklin wrote a letter to Yale's president, Ezra Stiles. Listen closely, all you Connecticut people and nutmegs and Yaleys. Here he is. Here is my creed. I believe in one God, creator of the universe, that he governs it by his providence, that he ought to be worshipped, that the most acceptable service we render him is doing good to his other children, that the soul of man is immortal and will be treated with justice in another life, respecting its conduct in this. As to Jesus of Nazareth, my opinion of whom you particularly desire, I think the system of morals in his religion, as he left them to us, the best the world ever saw or is likely to see. But I apprehend it has received various corrupt changes, and I have, with most of the dissenters in England, some doubts as to his divinity, though it is a question I do not dogmatize upon, having never studied it. And think, now mind you, we spent all those months with John Carroll in Quebec trying to convince the Quebecois to turn revolutionary, so you would have thought they'd have talked about it, but I guess not. And I think it needless to busy myself with it now, when I expect soon an opportunity of knowing the truth with less trouble. I see no harm, however, in its being believed, if that belief has the good consequence, as it probably has, of making his doctrines more respected and better observed. Oh, you have a problem with that. What's your problem with that, Professor Biersach?
It sounds all too familiar.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, please, tell me more. What do you mean?
Oh, I mean, I've been hearing that kind of thing. Okay, the questioning of the divinity of Christ, well, you'll assume that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But reducing Christ to just, obviously, a moral teacher, and saying that his moral teachings are okay, and it's probably okay. He sort of allows that it's okay that you can believe in him, his divinity, if it helps you carry out the moral code.
Yeah.
But there's no mention there of the church that he founded. There's no mention there of any real theology.
No.
In fact, he never had time to deal with that part of it.
That's not important. But Ben Franklin was quite willing to tolerate Catholicism. He was willing even to appoint the first Archbishop of Baltimore. You know, if that isn't almighty white,
very white of him, yeah.
Yeah, you know, heavens, I wish somebody would appoint an Archbishop to Los Angeles. But I'm sorry, was that an egregious anti-Raj slap? Sorry, Your Eminence. But on the other hand, President Jefferson wrote in 1816 to a Mrs. Harrison Smith, "My opinion is that there would never have been an infidel if there had never been a priest." Of course, there may be some... No. Who said that? You stop. The artificial structures they have built on the purest of all moral systems, for the purpose of deriving from it pence and power, revolts those who think for themselves and who read in the system only what is really there. But there's more. In 1822, 2 years earlier rather, Mr. Jefferson got a letter from his predecessor in office, John Adams. Now, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, when they were in political life, were bitter rivals. They were the respective leaders of the two political parties that opposed one another. But after they both retired, they gave themselves up to the study of religion. And what follows is the distillation of that long study. On December 3rd, 1813, Adams informed Jefferson that, quote, "Indeed, Mr. Jefferson, what could be invented to debase the ancient Christianism, which Greeks, Romans, Hebrews, and Christian factions, above all the Catholics, have not fraudulently imposed upon the public? Miracles after miracles have rolled down in torrents, wave succeeding wave in the Catholic Church, from the Council of Nice, and long before, to this day." And then he wrote to Jefferson on July 16th, 1814, "If the Christian religion, as I understand it," which of course was the way Franklin understood it, "as I understand it, or as you understand it, should maintain its ground, as I believe it will, yet Platonic, Pythagoric, Hindu, and Kabbalistical Christianity, which is Catholic Christianity, and which has prevailed for 1,500 years, has received a mortal wound, of which the monster must finally die." And again, June 20th, 1815, Adams writes, "The question before the human race is whether the God of nature shall govern the world by his own laws, or whether the priests and kings shall rule it by fictitious miracles. or in other words, whether authority is originally in the people, or whether it is descended for 1800 years in a succession of popes and bishops, or brought down from heaven by the Holy Ghost in the form of a dove in a vial of holy oil. That refers to the miracle that occurred at the coronation of King Clovis. On February 2nd, 1816, he wrote to Jefferson, "That stupendous monument of human hypocrisy and fanaticism, the Church of St. Peter at Rome." Now, you ever get the feeling they didn't like us very much?
I think so.
But there was hope. There was hope. And Jefferson said as much. June 26, 1822, he wrote to Benjamin Waterhouse, "This is President Jefferson now, remember on the $2 bill. Adams didn't get anything." "I rejoice that in this blessed country of free inquiry and belief, which has surrendered its creed and conscience to neither kings nor priests, the genuine doctrine of one only God is reviving. And I trust that there is not a young man now living in the United States who will not die a Unitarian." Well, you know what, gang? He was wrong and he was right. Guess how was he right? Or how was he wrong, Professor Biersach?
I'm sorry. Before I even attempt to answer that question, you know what's going through my mind
Tell us.
is that in every church where I go to Mass, there's an American flag inside the sanctuary.
You betcha.
You know, and in fact, in one church where I go, there's American flags painted on the outside of the building, and it's like,
is there a problem here?
it's always bothered me, but it's just going to bother me more after tonight. Is that when I go in there and there's the American flag inside the sanctuary, and it's like, what's it doing there?
It's being worshipped. What does anything do with the sanctuary? You see, it's funny you should ask about that. I'll tell you a funny story about the American flag in the sanctuaries. I'll have you know that while you will see the American flag in almost all churches today, not just Catholic, you know, if you go into an Episcopal church, on the one hand, you'll see Old Glory. And on the other, you will see the Episcopal church flag. If you go into a lot of Protestant things like Baptists and so on, you'll see on one side Old Glory, and on the other, this sort of funny Christian flag they've got. But you know what, gang? Nobody else did it before American Catholics. If you travel to Catholic churches outside the United States, except in Canada and Australia, where they've started doing it since Vatican II, because just as a lot of their advanced people want to become republics to imitate us, so they want to worship themselves the way we do. We are, if you're an English speaker and you live in the great world outside, you really only have two patterns to follow. You could be British or you could be American. And guess which one's more successful? If you don't believe me, the next time you're in Moscow, go to McDonald's. You'll find out. But we originated the custom to show our Protestant neighbors that we were as good Americans as anybody. And we put the flag in our sanctuaries, and our Protestant friends and neighbors saw that and said, well, wait a minute. If the Catholics are that American, I guess we are too. But the habit grew up after the Civil War, and it was finally approved by Pope St. Pius X for the United States alone. But we went into a lot of things that nobody else did, the Church in America, as a result of the culture we found ourselves in.
Before you move on to that, could we just pause for a moment and point out that the American reverence of the American flag far exceeds the kind of reverence you'll find for national flags in other countries.
Well, that's true.
For example, if you know, remember President Bush wanted to have an amendment that you can't burn a flag.
That's right.
You know, now other countries were looking at us a little strangely about that because, you know, I can remember like when I was a little kid in school. And sometimes I'd get stuck with I'd get the honor of putting the American flag up the pole. And it's like Sister Mary Handlebars would stand there with her yardstick to make sure it never touched the ground.
That's right.
Now,
and
she never paid that much attention to say when I was, you know, handling anything to do with getting ready for Mass as an altar boy or anything. But boy, you don't let the American flag touch the bloody ground.
Well, there's a reason for that. It's sacred.
Yeah, exactly.
That other stuff, and you know the proof of the pudding? Is Sister Mary Handlebar still in the land of the living?
I don't know.
Well, let's put it this way.
I thought you were going to ask me if she's still a nun. That I know the answer to.
Well, the question is, if Sister Mary Handlebars was still alive today,
Yeah.
which do you think would be likelier for her to do? When you touch with your hands the chalice to go eek, or when you let the flag touch the ground to go eek?
A flag, yeah.
Funny how that works. Well, at least she's kept her faith in something.
Well, that's all it takes is faith in whatever.
Faith in whatever.
Don't care what.
As long as you've got faith. And President Eisenhower said that. He lived in the 50s. How many remember President Eisenhower? Show of hands. I don't. I'm just raising my hand. Do you remember it?
Mm-hmm.
No, put your hand up. Keep your hands up, all you Eisenhower babies.
No.
Gosh. They're just never heard of it. So the majority of people here lived in the days of good King Ike. So
Golfing King Ike.
Golfing King Ike. Golfing King. Yes, well, go figure. But in all of this, ladies and gentlemen, in all of this, there was always a bit of the absurd in a way. I mean, you'd always be told men died for that flag. And mind you, having served in our armed forces and having me. Who?
Whose side?
Whose side? The American, I'll have you know. I was brought up thinking that I would meet my end fighting the Soviets in the Fulda Gap. The Fulda Gap, you wouldn't know about it. It's in Germany, West Germany. Well, not now. It's Central Germany. Anyway. The notion was that I'd be dead as a doornail, fighting our country's enemies, the way my father had a good chance to be when he fought in World War II. And I was told all about not touching the flag. I was taught, and can still do, the special way to fold the flag. You all know how to fold the flag? And you know why it ends up in a little triangle? It represents the three-cornered hat of our, not of the English. Listen to you. No, the three-cornered hat of our great founding fathers who made us what we are today. Don't snort. We're wonderful people. You went poof. Look at our president. He epitomizes all that's best in us. Now, you ask why I say this. You ask why I say this. Well, since I'll tell you. Mr. Biersach.
Yes.
Now, you have in front of you a book of Catholic principles regarding the setup of the state and its relations between church and state. Do you not?
Mm-hmm.
Leo XIII, Pius IX. Can you give us some yummy selections?
Oh, yeah.
Yummy
sure.
quotes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, say something else while I get out the syllabus here.
Heavens. Well, here's a logical question. We'll set the stage for a minute. If something is good, ladies and gentlemen, is it good? If something is bad, is it bad? Well, wait a minute. If it's a principle, can a bad principle be good sometimes? Not its application, you understand, but the principle itself. No. You mean something that's inherently evil can't be good? Well, of course, she's one of us, my generation. But the generation
You know,
X.
people try to put us down talking about my generation.
Yes, well,
Just
good
because
reason.
we get around. But,
Now you see why the Summer of Love had to turn 30 this year.
yeah.
But
Thank you. That's quite a compliment.
yes, well, they
I
auctioned
turned 30 just this year.
They
Funny how this works.
They auctioned off Jerry Garcia's house. I'll have you know.
Well,
To celebrate.
It's funny. We're talking about Americanism here, and I just happened to open up
To what?
Pius IX's Syllabus of Errors.
Yes.
His 55th error in the list of errors that Catholics must
Not believe.
must not believe or be in danger of losing their souls. The 55th error is the church is to be separated from the state and the state from the church.
Are you saying that's evil?
It is evil to believe that the church is to be separated from the state and the state from the church.
But my country is based upon separation of church and state.
Well, then what does that make your country?
Stop! Gosh, you're all saying it once. I felt trapped in Village of the Damned.
It was kind of a scary sound.
Good, isn't it?
It takes a village.
It takes a village, yes. It takes a village of the damned.
And here's one written just for your friend Eisenhower.
Play golf?
Error number 15. It is evil to believe that every man is free to embrace and profess that religion which he, led by the light of reason, thinks to be the true religion.
Ah! Ah! Let me repeat once again for our radio audience. Ah!
Tell that to the Pope.
Yeah. Ah! Gosh.
And
We're back
error
in the Village of the Damned again.
Yeah. Error number 16. It is evil to believe that in the worship of any religion whatever, man can find the way to eternal salvation and can attain eternal salvation.
But Assisi was Well, you see, we got problems right here in River City. And the problem...
Are we saying that some of the basic assumptions of the American body politic
are evil. Evil. Let's see if we get that going. No, don't. Gosh.
Poppies will make them sleep.
Trapped in a Halloween pageant he never made. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the problem then, as Catholics, is that we face a country whose basic principles are evil. Now, having said that,
could I just interject? Another problem is that
don't we have enough?
Since trads tend to be conservative-minded, have you noticed that a lot of trads are No.
Village of the Damned. Well, as a matter of fact, yes, I've noticed this.
I was going to say that many trads are politically conservative and therefore
evil.
Are strong.
Of course, they're politically liberal. They're evil. Strong American, strong patriots.
Patriots. They tend to be very patriotic, which is why one of the churches I go to has American flags painted on the outside. So when people say, "How do I get to that church?" I say, "Look for the flags painted on the outside." And then people say, "What?"
But patriotism is a virtue. St. Thomas teaches that. Tons of people, patriotism is a virtue.
Well, if the country that you're being patriotic to is good.
Well, now let's define good. Let's define good here as far as countries go. Now, having said that the country's principles are evil, does that mean that we're an island of evil in a sea of wonderfulness? Is that what we're talking? No.
This is like reverse psychology. Americans are always going, "Boy, we're the greatest country." We've got this group saying we're the evilest country, and we're proud of it.
We spread our blight everywhere. Welcome to Mordor. We love Sauron.
Welcome to the real
Well, my fellow orcs and orc wives. No, the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, that a country is evil to the degree that it is not run and based along Catholic principles. That's the definition of a good country versus a bad country. And as you know, there are very, very few countries today.
Not any, are there?
Liechtenstein. But for the most part,
It's a ballad election.
yeah, well, it's about Liechtenstein. That's something. It's a start. Someplace. But the other countries of the world, however, it's more or less. A few countries still don't permit divorce. A few Catholic countries still don't permit abortion. None in Europe. But to the degree that it's sort of like, you see, you can't do it in black and white in the sense that it's all good, it's all bad. You have to look at a country the way you look at individuals. Now, if I said to you, if you're an honest person and a Catholic, and I said to you, "Are you a good person?" You would have to say, if you were honest, "I don't know. Sometimes I'm incredibly wonderful, and God can feel grateful to have me on his side. But other times, I'm evil." I go to confession, and I tell the priest how evil I am. And he says, be nice to someone. That's my penance. Then I go off, and I'm obnoxiously sweet and loving to all. But, you see, it's the same way with countries. And you know that some people have, remember, if you're an individual, goodwill is love of truth. Bad will is love of self. And these two qualities are present in all of us in varying amounts, not just as one deal, but from moment to moment. And so it is with countries.
Let me put a different spin on that. What is the ultimate good for any single individual? It's to save their soul.
Right.
Okay. So if you have a government that is really interested in the welfare of its citizens, what would it be most interested in doing?
Taxing them to death.
What would it be most interested in?
Sending them to fight and die in foreign wars.
No. The saving their souls.
Oh.
Okay. That would be the primary concern of the government. Okay, so when you had these horrible monarchies, these Catholic monarchies where the king was subject to the emperor who was subject to the pope, and the king's first duty was to the citizens under him to secure heaven for them in every way that he could, to help them get to heaven, and to defend the church. All the knights, when they took their oath of chivalry, the first thing they swear is to defend the faith. You never see that in a King Arthur movie, but the first thing a knight swears to defend is the Catholic faith. All right? Why? Because this is the thing that saves souls, and that's the real good. That's the whole point of being human beings and living. All this other stuff about I believe in a natural God and all this stuff.
Nature is God.
Okay, that does not address the issue. When you have a document that elevates life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as the be-all and end-all of human existence, well, wait a minute. That isn't what Catholics say is the real be-all and end-all. Because we're not concerned with this life. We're concerned with the next. But the trouble is that when you separate church from state, then the state becomes involved in the material aspects.
Well, that's true for Catholics. But, I mean, we can't force our beliefs on others.
Well, if you believe that there is a truth, and that if you don't fulfill certain things, you'll go to hell, and if you don't tell others, then you're committing sin.
Well, obviously, I can't believe any of that, or I wouldn't have made the asinine statement I just made. Now would I have?
Which asinine statement you just made?
Of the many. Well, that's true for us Catholics, but I wouldn't want to force my opinions upon others. Because obviously, when I say that, I mean to say my opinions are not true. And they're just opinions.
No. You have your truth,
and you have
and
your
I have
truth.
my truth.
And we're both nuts. Because you know what? Madness is not conforming the will to reality. Or, which comes to the same thing, saying that there's no objective reality to conform the will to. That's madness. That's absolute nuttiness. And
sounds like our Declaration of Independence.
That's what we're based on. You might consider us perhaps evil in a larger sense, but more of an insane asylum in a... think of us as Camarillo written large. I don't mean the seminary. Well, no, the seminary too, both in teaching and in conduct. But that's the old joke, was that it was very hard having the state madhouse and the archdioceses and cemetery, so the seminary rather, so close, because it was hard to tell the difference between the graduates of the two institutions. But the madhouse is closed, however, so now that
it isn't.
Oh, the madhouse is still open?
They're graduating seminaries all the time.
Oh, well, there you go. Thank you. That's been clarified. I feel better as a person. Thank you. But in truth, ladies and gentlemen, the problem here is that the question then of the evilness of the country. It's true, but in the sense that so many other countries are evil, and in the sense that those countries, like this one, India and Japan, are based upon worship of the country itself. There's a particular evil there, you see. And it's a heathen kind of evil. You see, the animists, the pagans, tend to worship the spirits of things. You know, the spirit of the rock, the spirit of the trees, the spirit of this, spirit of that. That's what animism is all about. That's what it comes from. Spirit, animism. Well, that, at its best, can sort of approach a kind of natural religion. At its very best. But it usually degenerates, as I say, into a pure worship of self. That's why so many of these national cults, like Shinto in Japan, Hinduism in India, and of course the worship of the emperors in Rome, require terrible sacrifices sometimes out of their adherents, and why they're just awful. Well, the difference between our state religion and theirs is that they hadn't known Christ. They had not as yet received him, at least in the beginning. India and Japan, of course, have a lot more to answer for than they did. But we were a Catholic country once. We were a Christian country once, albeit a long time before the Declaration of Independence. And we turned our back on them. Here in Los Angeles, California, you go down to the plaza and down by Olvera Street, and you'll see a statue of King Charles III of Spain, who was the founder of this city. Now, Charles III did some bad things, he did some good things. Bad things? He helped push the dissolution of the Jesuits, and he ejected them from Latin America, which helped actually pave the way for the ruin of the Spanish Empire. But he also ordered all of his office holders to take an oath to defend the Immaculate Conception, the doctrine which at that point was still debated, to the point of death. He did other nice things. And this city of Los Angeles was founded, although at the tail end, it was founded as an integral part of that Catholic order of old Europe. And it's all gone. We have a Catholic mayor.
Really?
We have a cardinal who is able to make the city council obey him. It's almost a parody, ladies and gentlemen. It's almost a joke, if you see what I mean. We have our Catholic alcalde and our cardinal who's very close to him, and it's all wonderful except that it's all horrible. Because again, you keep the form but not the substance. So at any rate, ladies and gentlemen, that is where we are. So we come back to the question of patriotism. Now, can anyone answer for me? We'll try Professor Biersach. He'll speak for all of you.
But they're evil.
You too!
Okay.
Not me, though. I was born in New York. But my mother says she had hoped to give birth to me in the foyer of the UN building, but it didn't work. As an offering to the powers that be, wrapped in the flag. That's right, my swaddling clothes, or else at the stock exchange in Wall Street. But anyway, here's the question for you, Professor Biersach.
Yes.
Now, if I were a Catholic Japanese, what would be an act of patriotism on my part? How would my whole life as a Japanese now have to be oriented as a Catholic Japanese? In other words, give up sushi. Ha! No such luck. No. Remember that the emperor is, before the war he was supposed to be a god, but even now he's kind of the chief priest of the national cult.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know that much about Japanese culture, but I would assume that I cannot worship the emperor.
Well, that's a good
and
start.
be a Catholic Japanese.
But what else should you do vis-a-vis the emperor and vis-a-vis his court and vis-a-vis the whole system?
I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you. No, move to America. No, I'll tell you, because the very first Catholic...
Because as a Catholic, I can't commit seppuku. I have to...
The first Catholic, which moved to America, would be the equivalent of... No, the very first Catholics had this problem in the Roman Empire. And so you've got to look back and see what they did. We see several things. They could not worship the emperor, and they could not obey imperial laws when they were immoral. They served in the army. But when given commands, that, like worshiping the emperor, that contradicted their faith, they were very often martyred. Sometimes whole legions. If you ever go to Switzerland today, you'll find that just about every parish church, seemingly, has some Roman legionary saint stuck under the altar. And the reason for this is that St. Maurice and the entire legion he commanded were wiped out. They were all martyred. Listen, you martyr a legion of troops, you got a lot of relics. Tons. Enough for all the parish churches in Switzerland. Well, they did that. But that was only half of it. What else did they do? They prayed for the conversion of the emperor and the empire, and they tried everything they could to convert that country. And in the end, after about 3 centuries, the emperor and the country converted. And that was the start of Christendom, which lasted until the Reformation in general, and certainly until, in bits and pieces, the Reformation, the French Revolution, and
Wait, I
World War
thought
I.
we were talking about Japan.
We are. I'm getting back to Japan. Keep Japan in mind. Now, using this as an analogy, if you were a Japanese, what could you do? You could not worship the emperor. You could not worship the country. You could serve in the army, unless you were ordered to do something not in keeping with your faith. That's why the commander of the Japanese fleet at Pearl Harbor, Admiral Raphael Yamamoto, was a Catholic. Not well known. When I've told this to people, sometimes they go, how could a Catholic have commanded the Japanese at Pearl Harbor? Because you've got this unconscious association of the United States with God. So obviously, I might ask, how could a Catholic atom bomb crew drop a bomb on the center of Catholicism in Japan?
But they did.
No, that's impossible. That didn't happen. And as we know, far more civilians were killed at Pearl Harbor than... Well, yes, let's move along. As I was saying, so he could do that, but he would have to pray for the conversion of the emperor and the imperial government and for all of Japan, and he would have to work to convert as many Japanese to the faith as he could. So that one day he could hope, he could dream that perhaps Japan would become a Catholic country, would achieve its real destiny. And if the emperor became a Catholic, then he really would be, as it were, the son of heaven. Now, there is a country in Southeast Asia called Vietnam, of which some of you may have heard. Now, Vietnam was, until 1956, an empire. It was an emperor, and his name was Bao Dai. He lived in a city called Hue, and it was called the Imperial City, just like in Peking. And he was the head of the national cult, like the Emperor of Japan or the Emperor of China. And the Emperor Bao Dai was the focus of the system, as in any Confucian monarchy, in Far East Asia. Now, Vietnam had become a French protectorate, and they'd had a lot of missionaries, a lot of Vietnamese converted. And earlier emperors had persecuted the church, which is what brought the French in to take over, to prevent Catholics from being slaughtered. And a lot of them were before that happened. I've seen their relics in different places in horrible, fiendish ways. Well, what happened? After World War II, communist insurrection breaks out. The French are defeated. A compromise is made. Vietnam is divided into North and South. North for the communists, the South remains under the imperial government. Meanwhile, Bao Dai invites a fellow called Diem, who was a Catholic, to become prime minister. But the United States assured Diem that he'd be better off as president of a republic than prime minister of an empire. So Diem has a plebiscite, which is rigged, and Bao Dai goes off into exile in France. And then, to show you that the United States is always good by its allies and always stands by them, in 1963, the United States gave its okay to a coup that resulted in Diem's murder, 2 weeks before the murder of President Kennedy, who'd acquiesced in the thing. I'm not saying that there's any causal connection, but what goes around comes around. Imagine ordering the death of a fellow Catholic president. Isn't that wonderful? But what happened to Bao Dai in all of this? Well, he was in France, in exile. And loyalist Vietnamese all over the world would occasionally go and visit him, and he did rather well in exile. And he died a month ago. It was something very, very interesting. I read in his obituary. He converted to Catholicism while he was in France. Now, I don't know that Bao Dai would have converted if he had stayed in Vietnam. Very possibly not. But what if he had? Considering the rate at which the Vietnamese have been converting ever since then, up to and including the present day, virtually the only large number of vocations we get anymore from the Vietnamese. Considering all this, who's to say but that Bao Dai, if he'd been left as emperor, would have converted? And in a society like Vietnam's, if the emperor had converted, it would have been like the Emperor Constantine converting, or the way it would be if the Emperor of Japan converted. Luckily, we in the United States made sure that wouldn't happen. But that is how a patriotic Japanese, or patriotic Vietnamese, or patriotic Chinese, or patriotic Indian would have to be. To fulfill the duties of the state that the Church recognizes as duties to any state, regardless of its origin. To refuse the state that which can't be given it, i.e. to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's, but always and at all the time work for the conversion of his country. That's the only real patriotism a Catholic living in a non-Catholic land can possibly have. That same Catholic Japanese, even though the majority of his fellow citizens would identify being a loyal Japanese with being a loyal Shintoist, would have to say, no, I do not believe in Shinto and I do not believe the emperor is a god. I'll fight for him because he's my emperor, but he is not my god. That is where we are, ladies and gentlemen, in the United States. We live in a pagan country. It has always been pagan. Bits of it were Catholic. We live in one. But the false religion of the country, we can have no part of. I have to say it, and this sounds harsh, but the Founding Fathers were not good men, the ones that counted. They hated our religion. And how can you be a good man and hate our religion? I don't see. How is this possible? Can someone explain it to me? How could someone be good and hate the Catholic faith? If you could explain this mystery to me, I'll sit on a firecracker the 4th of July. I won't like it, but I'll do it.
I'll light it.
I bet you would. See?
That's what friends are for.
Yeah, well.
That's what friends are for.
Okay.
But really and truly, ladies and gentlemen, think it over. And how much of what we take for granted is built upon the principles of those men? Who here, if he had heard those quotes from President Eisenhower, back when they were said, those of us who remember him, if I'd heard President Eisenhower back then, I'd have been surprised, not even born yet. But those of you who were, if you had heard him then say those things, would you have batted an eye? Would you have seen anything wrong with it? Tell me the truth. Show of hands. Which of you, back then, would have thought that was at all strange? See? You see? A few people would have, but they were cranks. They were cranks. It has taken the massive decay in public morality, which we have seen in the past 30 years, to uncover the false principles at the root of it. The only reason, ladies and gentlemen, why the majority of those of us who are able to see the problem, the only reason why we're able to see it is precisely because of everything going downhill the way it has. Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. If abortion was still illegal, the way it was till 73, if contraception was still illegal, the way it was till 1964, if pornography was still illegal, the way it was until 61, I think, how many of us would notice there was a problem? This was God's way of saving us, in a sense, from accepting what generations of Catholics had accepted, to the point of putting the flag in our sanctuaries. I served under that flag. I swore an oath that I would die under it if I were asked to. And I suppose I should do so again if I were able to take the oath, and if I were in the army still. But I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, not what that flag is, but what it has come to represent is something awful. The right of people to choose for themselves whatever they want to believe. And in the name of that belief, that flag has been carried to all sorts of places. You think of the Vietnam War? If we had not encouraged President Diem, or Prime Minister Diem, to overthrow his emperor, who's to say that we would have had to go there? Or what if we hadn't betrayed our French allies, and there had been no North Vietnam? So many ifs. In the name of that flag and in the name of freedom, we sided with the Russians against the British and French at Suez, against the Dutch in Indonesia, against the Belgians in the Congo, against the French in Algeria, against the Hungarians in Hungary.
Gee, we're rotten. There's
Well,
good in us, huh?
There can be, but not so long as the country is ruled by anti-Catholic principles. Let's put it this way. If I take to a life of crime, having established the fact that I believe that theft is good, at least if it's me stealing from you. You know the old joke about the native convert. The priest asked him, well, do you understand the difference between good and evil? And he says, certainly, Father. Evil is when my neighbor steals my cow. Good is when I steal his. Well, that's not so. But so long as our country is governed, and not just governed, because we all believe this to a greater or lesser degree, even as I've said, back in Eisenhower days, you wouldn't have had a problem. Remember, it was under Eisenhower, not to pick on poor old Ike. I like Ike. But, somebody got that. But, it was under him that some of the most horrible betrayals of our foreign policy occurred.
Well, we ought to take a break about now because we're at the middle of the talk. And
Oh, let's take a break. Now, ladies and gentlemen.
you know, I was looking for something here, and I found it.
Oh, I love it.
And this is always good when I find things that I'm looking for.
What did you find? Now, you were depressed when we broke up.
And I'm getting worse.
How so? Why?
Well, because I was, you know, we did a whole talk on the Syllabus of Errors. Actually, we did.
A whole talk? We did 3 talks.
Actually, then we did another one.
And we did another talk. That's right.
The
and Traveling Error Show.
It gets better all the time, but error number 60, which happens to be paragraph number 1760, but no mind. Page, you don't use pages in Denzinger unless you're looking at page 440. Okay, but the 60th error, that it is evil to believe that authority is nothing more than numbers and the sum of material strengths. Authority is nothing more than numbers. In other words, power resides in
the people.
The majority of the people.
All power to the people. Yes.
Yes. That's another basic American principle.
It's called democracy. It's not just American.
Democracy.
Everybody believes in it.
Now, hold it. Democracy, then, is an evil form of government.
Yes.
Well, let's hold on a minute. Hold on. Now, democracy means majority rule, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was brought up in school to believe that democracy was the best form of government, and that the only thing that what separated us from those evil commies that I was being trained up to fight one day was democracy. And when I would go to spill my blood in the Fulda Gap, it would be to save our democratic way of life against the evil Reds from the East. Now, they however, also believed in democracy. We had representative democracy. The Soviets claimed nutritional democracy. No, I'm sorry, those are the cannibals in Uganda. Idi Amin actually wants to define cannibalism as nutritional democracy. That's not a joke. So, but in the Soviet Union, they had people's democracy. And of course, I was saying earlier, all power to the people. Well, all power to the People's Soviets of workers, peasants, and soldiers. And yet, do we not say majority rule is good?
Mm-hmm.
Well, was there a majority rule in Uganda under Idi Amin? I mean, did the majority have any say in their destinies? No. Okay, well, in the Soviet Union, under Stalin and Khrushchev and all them, did the average individual have any say in his destiny?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Well, in the United States, we can vote.
We're empowered.
That's right. And we all get to vote. And that makes a real difference, doesn't it?
Yes.
We don't get to
Unless
count.
everything's rigged.
Well,
So the no,
it's
see.
a distinction without a difference.
Oh, a distinction without a difference.
In other words, we can pretend that we have power, and yet all of us really come to realize sooner or later, just like it usually comes about the time you realize Santa Claus is maybe not so real.
That's not
That
true.
maybe your vote doesn't really change anything.
I knew my vote didn't change anything long before I just gave up believing in Santa Claus. That's why I'm on welfare. But no, I'm not. But I don't believe. Anyway, the point is that, nevertheless, we've got two little problems here. The one is that democracy doesn't really exist anywhere, anyway, anyhow. Why is that? Because life being what it is, the specialists are the ones who actually do things. Let me give you an example. You've heard of brain surgery, all right? Now, if you believe self-taught brain, yeah, see, did a lot of good for me, didn't it? But I took out half my brain. I'm not a half-wit yet. But no, think about it, ladies and gentlemen. If you were going up for brain surgery, would you want the wisest, longest in school, best experienced brain surgeon that ever lived, or would you like half of this side of the classroom, and all of us to vote on the best way to do your brain surgery? Now, should I make the decision this way or that way? Show of hands. Oh, yes, that's another question. Should we spend the money on anesthesia? Sure. So you see, it's true of all sorts of things. Taking it, the internal revenue. You know, who do you want to do your taxes? A tax expert or? I could do your taxes for you, sure. Exemptions for all your fish. 28 guppies, sure. But the thing is that, A, it's not real and it doesn't work. And you don't want it to work in anything that affects you directly. But then, also, the concept itself is wrong. So even if you could get it to work, it would be morally wrong. But you'll never have to worry about that. Because you'll never get it to work.
That's an interesting bit of intellectual somersaulting there. Okay,
I've done it
we
physically,
want
but I'm not
we are trained to want it to work, and yet even if it did work, it would be evil in and of itself. So we're all trained to want something evil.
Oh. Does that mean we're bad?
But perhaps we might want to touch on then why is democracy evil?
Well, I guess you'd have to go back to what governance really is. Governance is the right, the authority to determine what's going to happen in day-to-day affairs. That's governance. Whether spiritual or temporal, governance is the ability to say, do this, do that. So then the question becomes, how is that going to be determined? How will policy be determined? Now, all of us, most of the time, want to give in to our worst sides. Think of the times you've given in to temptation and the times you've resisted it. Democratically speaking, if you were to take together all the times you've ever faced temptation, all right, and imagine that instead of being times you've been tempted, they're actually voters. In your life, who wins the election, virtue or vice? Yeah, vice comes in by a landslide. Oh, it's a landslide. You see people in straw hats, red, white, and blue bunting. Hey, President Vice. Yeah, V. And the wonderful thing about the last two elections is that my analogy and the reality have merged. But no, that's unkind. But the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, we as individuals and as a group tend to give in to our worst sides and to put anything idealistic at abeyance. What do you think the Declaration is saying when they say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? The Declaration didn't have to say it. Left to themselves, the people, that means you and me, and everyone who lives and breathes, put the pursuit of happiness first anyway, almost all the time. What was Eve doing in the garden but pursuing happiness? And you know what? There are four inhabitants of the garden that we've got, or at least four people there. They're not people, but four players. There's Adam, there's Eve, there's the serpent, there's God. You had a majority of 3-1. It's called the fall. We won! Democracy triumphed! Free Eden! Radio Free Eden! V for victory! Yes! And I'll tell you what, those terrible rules that were imposed by a free vote of the people, the serpent, Adam, and Eve, were voted out. And you know what happened? Well, what happened was they got what they voted for. Kind of like the American people.
I didn't vote for him. I didn't either.
Well, there are two ways you can read that. The majority didn't.
Another misconception about democracy is that the majority can perceive what is morally right. And this comes into play when you get into things like abortion and birth control and all these kind of things, is that whatever the majority of people decide they want to do must be right. If it's legal, it's right.
No, it's legal, it's moral.
And, of course, this really doesn't make any sense if we've already looked at, we generally tend toward our base instincts. Also, the idea that if you have any group of people, most of them will know what's correct, as in terms of true. Now, I always make a point with my class at school of demonstrating how this doesn't work, because I teach technical classes, and every now and then I'll just say, well, now, here's this technical problem. And the answer could be A, B, or C as to what's really going on here. Let's take a vote. Now, I know nobody knows the answer, or there might be a few that intuit it, but generally it's just whatever appeals to you as an answer. I make everyone vote. Everyone has to vote or else it wouldn't work. You kind of have to pull teeth in a classroom. And invariably, the majority vote for the wrong answer. And then I get to make the point of, so now
answer.
We know that democracy is the key to finding out what's true. Wrong. And, of course, students don't like that. And I'll usually get comments like, well, would you rather live in Russia? And I say, it has nothing to do with where I want to live. I'm just showing that democracy doesn't work. But anyway, time is going on, and I did promise to read a few more
quotes.
Key yummy quotes. You got your chance to read some yummy.
All right, read some yummy quotes.
And this.
But only read ones Eisenhower would have approved of.
Well, it's this darn letter from the Pope to Cardinal Gibbons, who gave us the Baltimore Catechism. And again, you'll notice how many trads will say, I read the Baltimore Catechism, therefore I know the Catholic faith. And yet,
And yet.
it was a gift to the American people by a cardinal that received this letter, and is therefore suspect. Okay, now you may recall that it began with saying that essentially the Pope is saying there are people in your country who are suggesting that we as Catholics relax our explanations so that they'll be more palatable to other people. Okay, now in the second paragraph, 1968, we got away from Sgt. Pepper now. It says, now the history of all past ages is witness that this apostolic see, to which not only the office of teaching, but also the supreme government of the whole church were assigned, has indeed continually adhered to the same doctrine, in the same sense, and in the same mind. That it has always been accustomed to modify the rule of life so as to never overlook the manners and customs of the various peoples which it embraces, while keeping the divine law unimpaired. Now that's an important distinction. The church will allow for local custom. The church will not change doctrine. There's a difference. Okay, now, if the safety of souls demands this, who will doubt that it will do so now? This, however, is not to be determined by the decision of private individuals who are quite deceived by the appearance of right, but it should be the judgment of the church. Okay, skipping a little bit. He says, the entire external teaching office, that is the church that is that you Americans are talking about, is rejected by those who wish to strive for the acquisition of Christian perfection as superfluous, nay, even as useless. They say that the Holy Spirit now pours forth into the souls of the faithful more and richer gifts than in times past.
Shades of Vatican II.
Shades of charismatic renewal. They say, you see, there's nothing new, folks. There's nothing new. They say that the Holy Spirit now pours forth into the souls of the faithful more and richer gifts than in times past, and with no intermediary.
Would you like me to do this in tongues for their benefit?
Please do.
I've got the gift.
Yeah, you can interpret.
No.
Okay, well,
Please, Spirit.
kills that one.
Okay, and that this is done by a kind of hidden instinct which teaches and moves them.
Ooh. Or is it heartburn?
Yet, to no one who examines the matter very thoroughly, i.e., people who think, when any external guide is removed, it is not apparent in the thinking of the innovators to what end that more abundant influx of the Holy Spirit should tend, which they extol so much.
Yeehaw.
Surely it is especially in the cultivation of virtues that there is absolute need of the assistance of the Holy Spirit, but those who are eager to pursue new things extol the natural virtues, but the natural virtues beyond measure, as if they correspond better with the way of life and needs of the present day.
You mean they don't?
Okay, skipping it down a little more. From this contempt, as it were, of the evangelical virtues, which are wrongly called passive, it easily followed that their minds were gradually imbued with a contempt even for the religious life.
Oh, you don't mean like what happened in all the religious orders in the 60s, do you?
Yeah, but we're still back in 1899.
Oh, it couldn't possibly have any reference to today. It's almost 100 years ago.
And that this attitude is common among the advocates of the new opinions, we conclude from certain opinions of theirs about the vows which religious orders pronounce. For they say that these vows are at very great variance with the spirit of our age, and that they are suited to weak rather than to strong minds, and that they are quite without value for Christian perfection and the good of human society, but rather obstruct and interfere with both. But it is clearly evident how false these statements are from the practice and teaching of the Church, by which the religious way of life has always been especially approved. Moreover, as for what they add, that the religious way of life is no or of little help to the Church, besides being odious to religious orders, will surely be believed by no one who has studied the history of the Church. except that's exactly what people say and do who don't study the history of the church. They say that the old virtues were passive, and what we need now is an active religion.
We've got what's called Maryknoll.
Finally, not to delay too long, the way and the plan which Catholics have thus far employed to bring back those who disagree with them are proclaimed to be abandoned and to be replaced by another for the future. In other words, we're not going to stick to our guns anymore. That's what you're suggesting, Cardinal Gibbons. You're suggesting that we don't stick to our guns, that we modify our presentation. But if of the different ways of preaching the Word of God that seem to be preferred sometimes by which those who dissent from us are addressed not in temples, but, well, let me skip that part. Okay, therefore, here's the crux, 1975, paragraph 1975. Therefore, from what we have said thus far, it is clear, our beloved son, meaning Cardinal Gibbons, our beloved son, that those opinions cannot be approved by us, the sum total of which some indicate by the name of Americanism. For it raises a suspicion that there are those among you who envision and desire a church in America other than that which is in the rest of the world.
Impossible. No.
One in unity of doctrine as in unity of government, and this Catholic, such is the church. And since God has established that its center and foundation be the chair of Peter, it is rightly called Roman. For where Peter is, there is the church. Therefore, whoever wishes to be called by the name of Catholic ought truly to heed the words of Jerome to Pope Damasus. I, who follow no one as first except Christ, associate myself in communion with your beatitude, that is, with the chair of Peter. Upon that rock I know the church is built. Whoever gathereth not with thee scattereth. Americanism is a heresy.
Well, wait. Wait.
Why?
I said wait.
Why?
Because Cardinal Gibbons, to whom it was sent, said, he wrote back, that there was nobody he knew of who believed all that stuff. And not only that, but that he'd be very much against anyone who did. And this is why, all the way down to Vatican II, church historians in the United States used to speak of Americanism, the phantom heresy. Anyone ever hear that phrase?
No.
No?
It's the phantom heresy that got flesh and blood somewhere along the line.
It became incarnate. Well, the funny thing was that at this time, a year before this letter came out, there was a chap called Dennis O'Connell, who was the head of the American College at Rome. And he wrote a little letter on the outbreak of the war between the United States and Spain. Now, this is in May of 1898, which is a year before this came out. Listen closely. Again, this was written to Archbishop Ireland of Minnesota, who was like this with Cardinal Gibbons. You know? I don't mean that literally. See the problem living in the 90s? You make a simple gesture and people make there was no suggestion of that ever, quite seriously. They were of one heart and mind, which, as you'll imagine in this case, was quite bad enough. Now, listen closely to what Bishop O'Connell wrote to Archbishop Ireland. He says, again, speaking about the war between the United States and Spain, for me, this is not simply a question of Cuba. If it were no question or a poor question. Then let the greasers eat one another up and save the lives of our dear boys. But for me, it is a question of much more moment. It is the question of two civilizations. It is the question of all that is old and vile and mean and rotten and cruel and false in Europe against all that is free and noble and open and true and humane
Rasta
in America.
some more.
When God, people are getting seasick here. When Spain is swept off the seas, much of the meanness and narrowness of old Europe goes with it, to be replaced by the freedom and openness of America.
Thank God.
This is God's way. This is God's way of developing the world. And all continental Europe feels that the war is against itself, and that is why they are all against us, and Rome more than all. Because when the prestige of Spain and Italy will have passed away, and when the pivot of the world's political action will no longer be confined within the limits of the continent, then the nonsense of trying to govern the universal church from a purely European standpoint and according to exclusively Spanish and Italian methods will be glaringly evident even to a child.
I think that's the Cardinal Mahoney's idea. He wants to wipe everything from
Oh.
Europe out, and he does not want any of that stuff.
Now, let's not draw possibly unfair parallels.
It was written in the book.
Well, then maybe it's true. But, you know, I had a very strange realization just in reading this bit about how awful the Spanish and the French and all that were. I am writing a book right now, which is a pilgrim's guide to Catholic shrines in Southeast Asia. Now, in the city of Da Nang in Vietnam, there is a graveyard. And in that graveyard are the bodies of Spanish and French troops who in 1856 came ashore at Da Nang to break the back of the persecution of the Catholics. That was why they came. They came because Catholic Vietnamese, not Catholic French, not Catholic Spanish, Catholic Vietnamese, were dying in droves in the most horrible ways imaginable. And so, to prevent this from happening, they fought and they died. And their cemetery, untouched by the communists, is there to this day. Now, many and many a time have American armies served overseas. I myself, as I mentioned earlier, thought that I would die in such service. My father fought the Japanese in World War II. And of course, as many of you know, in World War II, American soldiers fought in Europe and Africa. In World War I, they fought in Europe. And of course, during the Spanish-American War, they fought in Cuba and the Philippines and Puerto Rico. In the Civil War, of course, the Confederacy had to be brought to its knees. And then, in the Mexican War, California and Texas and New Mexico and all that had to be taken from Mexico. Then the War of 1812, we invaded Canada. This country has never fought a war for the protection of the Catholic faith. Not once, not ever. Spain and France and Portugal and Italy, they all have their shortcomings. Always did. Always did. At the height of the Middle Ages, the 13th greatest of centuries, there were awful things going on. There were terrible people in different places, many of them in charge. You know that God loved idiots. Not just because he made so many of them. I mean, he made a lot of termites too. Doesn't mean he likes them. No, it's because he always seems to put them in charge. It's funny. Maybe he realizes from all eternity they can't make a living any other way, so he figures start them at the top. They're sure to eat anyway. But nevertheless, with all of that, with the fact that the French and the Spanish governments both were doing terrible things at the same time against the faith in their own countries, when they came ashore at the beach of Da Nang, they came ashore for the faith. They were doing something good. Never in my lifetime, nor I warrant in yours, nor my grandfather's, has this country ever done anything that we could support so completely in the realm of foreign affairs. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing how whenever you stop and think about any one of our wars, there's always Oh, I don't know. Vietnam, Korea, World War II. Well, we were fighting the Nazis as the allies of the Soviets. Well, okay. World War I. Well, we were fighting Austria-Hungary and Germany at the side of the British and the French. There wasn't quite the question of obvious moral evil, perhaps on either side, but we couldn't really consider it a crusade for the faith. And then the rest of our wars, don't even think about it. So you see, we have a problem, ladies and gentlemen. We have a big problem. We never let ourselves really think about it. I am not here tonight, Professor Biersach is not here tonight, to give you a concrete solution to the problem, in the sense of...
It's so much easier to just present the problem.
Well, there is a solution to it, but it's hard because it starts at home.
Oh, we're not going to talk about that kind of thing again, are we?
Yeah. We are.
Well, this time, I'm usually the one that brings it up, and I'll let you bring it up this time.
Okay. Well, I will. For starters, apart from prayer, and most of the people here are big rosary sayers and mass goers and all that, which is very important. Slavery to Mary, that sort of thing, very, very important. We have to, in addition and alongside, in with and under our prayer lives, we have to reorient our way of thinking. Now, as was mentioned earlier, those of you who are Perry Mason era survivors, you would not have found, at the time that Della Street was taking dictation, you would not have found Mr. Eisenhower's statement out of line. Here's something to chew on. You may not be that much further along in your struggle toward a truly Catholic outlook as you think. Reread the Syllabus of Errors until you can read it without flinching. I flinch when I read it. It hurts. Reread Denziger. Study your Catholic histories. Time and time again, you'll find yourself saying, ooh, when you read about the Inquisition or the Crusades. You know, people always say, well, you'll have to admit there was some bad things done. Well, sure. You name me a single human endeavor in the pages of history that wasn't filled with evil deeds. You can't. Because you know the funny thing about endeavors in the pages of human history? They're done by humans. And you know what that means? It means the pursuit of happiness. And usually the pursuit of happiness isn't something you like if you're on the receiving end of somebody else's pursuit. What if somebody wants to pursue their happiness by looting my house? Suddenly I don't think they've got an inalienable right to it anymore. All of a sudden I think I've got an inalienable right to put a bullet through their brains. That's what I think. What if they're pursuing happiness through my daughter? What if they're pursuing it through desecrating my church? Well, then I say, yes, Father, I'll take it out immediately. Sorry, didn't mean that. But you see what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen? You can always find something awful in anything that human beings will do. But what you've got to ask yourself are two things. First, what was the motivating factor? And B, what was the final result? Take, for instance, the Inquisition. Now, we know the Inquisition was awful because, I mean, the very thought, which we were asking before, you know, about has the church ever outlawed Protestant? Of course they have. That's what the Inquisition was about. Now, let's look at it, though. A, is the Catholic faith true? Okay, well, we'll take that as a given. As Perry would say, we'll stipulate the truth of the Catholic faith. Second, if the Catholic faith is true, and there's no salvation outside of her, well then, heresy is really, really evil, and it's got to be gotten rid of. It's like a disease. That doesn't kill people. Worse, it takes them to hell. So, see, somehow or other, it's got to be kept from spreading. Now, that's the theory. Let's look at the bottom line. Before and during the Reformation, did England Scotland, Ireland, France, or Scandinavia have an inquisition? The answer is no. Germany, too. The answer is no. No, 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 no. Spain did. Now, in Germany, you had the bloody 30 Years' War, in which something like a third of the population, the civilian population, was killed off. In France, you had the wars of religion, Huguenots versus Catholics. Horrible, bloody stuff. You hear about the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. You never hear about the massacre of Amboise, do you? No, 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 no. The different civil wars in England, Scotland, and Ireland. Awful, awful things. Tons of people dying. Can anyone here tell me about the Spanish Civil War that happened at the same time? No. How peculiar. How come? Well, it's because they had the Inquisition. There was no great civil war in Spain. Tell you something else that's funny. By the time the wars of religion in France ended in 1589, France settled down. And about 20 years later, they started settling Canada in a big way. Meanwhile, Spain and Portugal, which also had its own Inquisition, were trying to settle Latin America. None of those three countries found it easy to get settlers. French, Spanish, and Portuguese did not want to leave the mother country. Now, mind you, the Spanish and Portuguese had the terrible Inquisition, and the French, having gotten through the wars of religion, became very repressive toward the Huguenots. And yet, it was hard to get French, Spanish, and Portuguese to come to the New World. Whereas, in Germany, the Netherlands, Scandinavia, Britain, where you had all this wonderful religious plurality, I can't say freedom because, of course, you weren't allowed to be Catholic officially. It was easy, well, oh so easy to get settlers to come over. So judging by the results, you would have to say the Inquisition wasn't a bad thing either. So if we say, on the one hand, the theory behind it was good, if we say that the results were good, what are we left with? But it was a good thing. Now, how many here could say, without feeling a little odd, that the Inquisition was unreservedly a good thing? I can't. I can't. I feel a little funny saying it. I almost feel like the thought police are going to come and take me away. You see, ladies and gentlemen, and a reflection of that is our reluctance to evangelize our neighbor. It's the flip side. The same thing that makes us feel uneasy about accepting as good what Catholics have done in the past makes us reluctant to spread the faith in the present. And I'm as much affected by it as anyone around. So, until we overcome that tendency in ourselves, it's very hard to convert this country. And yet that conversion is the only thing which will solve our dilemma. Just as the Japanese, or the Chinese, or the Vietnamese, or the Indian Catholics will only have their respective dilemmas solved by the conversion of their countries. Well, nothing else will do.
It's not a very glamorous solution because it means what we have to do is live our faith according to our station in life.
No, I want to live it according to someone else's station.
And it's like you don't get famous by praying the rosary. You don't get a lot of notoriety by going to Mass on Sunday. You don't get a whole lot of kudos for becoming a slave to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. It just, none of these things call a lot of attention to yourself. In fact, most of these things get rather humiliating.
And it's even worse because they're personally humiliating without reference to anyone else seeing how much you're struggling. I mean, at least if you could suffer in front of everyone, it's okay. When it's simply a question of mortifying your own will and your own problems, you know, you can't very well be feeling down about the fact that you're not really that good a Catholic, and then have someone come up to you and say, "Oh, gee, Charles, what's wrong?" Well, you know, I've still got a hard time accepting that religious freedom is bad. I see, Charles. Well, good. You won't get any sympathy. This side of the grave.
But who cares if you know you're right? What do you care?
Well, it shows you're un-American already. The fact that you could say such a
I
thing.
know I am, Charles. Can't you see this?
I mean,
No,
Cecilia,
but really, no one cares what people.
Yes.
I mean,
you would be surprised. You know what the
I
proof
don't
of the
care
pudding?
what they think.
Well, you're a very fortunate person, but most people are very, very worried. I mean,
No, they don't.
when you to see it in action, all you have to do is go to a reception for a non-Catholic wedding, invited by a Catholic friend, and bring up the faith and see the look on your Catholic friend's face. You become the bomb in the punch bowl.
All right.
Hey, I'm prepared to take on husband, sisters, brother-in-laws, nieces, and nephews, in which I have. I don't care.
And that is a very high state. In this area, at least, you've advanced spiritually, my child. Keep it up. But for most of us, however, it's a problem. So, do you have anything to add, Professor?
Well, Emily had a question.
Emily, you've been asking you've been
Earlier.
raising your hand. You don't remember it.
You don't? Oh, okay.
We'll make one up for you. Emily wanted to know.
Come on, Emily.
All right. Well, do we have any questions? Offers of cash. Those are always welcome. Come on now. You've heard all of this terrible anti-American stuff.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Well, it takes care of that. Mr. Coulombe, what about the House Un-American Activities Committee? Yes.
I'm always recalling sometimes the church itself has had to make certain decisions. The rule has seemed to be person in the church, government, whatever. You should not do evil. You should not commit evil so that good may come of it.
This is correct.
But on the other hand, when whatever you do is going to be evil, the church has said that the lesser of the two has been chosen.
That's correct.
So we have Americanism.
We do.
We live in this life. We have elections. If it's the conversation has said everything is evil. No matter what you do, it's evil.
But that's true.
Sometimes you must have to make. But if it's going to exist and we're going to have to live in it, sometimes you have to make a choice of the lesser of two evils.
Charles, for our studio audience, or our non-studio
sorry.
audience, could you
The
summarize
question
the question?
in a nutshell, the question is, the church teaches that it's never permissible to do good, evil rather good that evil may result, evil that good may result, but that sometimes, if all your choices are evil, you're to choose the lesser of two evils. And I presume that where the question is going is how this applies to the here and now. I would say one thing. The problem with Americanism, with the heresy of Americanism, is precisely that it does not recognize that it is a lesser of two evils. We tolerate a lot in this country as Catholics must in every non-Catholic country. Where Americanism went one step beyond was that it went from admitting that it was tolerating an evil to saying that that tolerance was a positive good. That is what John Courtney Murray was about. That is what the Decree of Religious Liberty is about. It is taking an expedient and making it a rule. And that, I mean, yes, of course we all tolerate things because the outcome might be worse, the alternative might be worse. But we must never fool ourselves into thinking that our accepting it is somehow good in and of itself. And we do this. We do it constantly.
I understand what you're saying.
I mean, to give you an example, all right, again, in the Army. Now, as a Catholic, in the Army, you generally have to attend Mass in buildings that are used for other sorts of worship, okay? Now, there are two ways I could approach this as a Catholic Bascoer in the United States Army. I could say, gee, too bad we're stuck sharing with those other religions, but if I want to go to Mass, this is what I got. Or I could say, which is what I would probably say these days, isn't this wonderful? We're all sharing the same building, all marching to the same drum under Old Glory.
I hope you know me that better than that.
I do, but nevertheless, it's an important point, and I'm glad for the question. it's an important point to bring out, because this is precisely what has put us where we are. We have had 2 centuries of the lesser of 2 evils. And mind you, I'm not saying, and I don't think Professor Biersach is saying, that we suddenly have to draw the sword and slaughter the heretics. Fun as that may be when the Cardinal confronts us. But we must not pretend that we're somehow being wise or particularly good, or worse yet, elevating tolerance to a virtue. The very name tolerance implies limited acceptance of an evil. See? And that's why when you say, isn't it wonderful, we're all so tolerant of each other, that's really a non sequitur. And if our language and our thoughts weren't so corrupt, we'd realize it's not a nice thing to say. What I'm really saying is, it's a terrible situation, and I'm so happy to go along with it. Well, I'll tell you, it's like this priest told a friend of mine the story about Archbishop Lefebvre. Now, apparently there were 6 or 60. My friend wasn't sure. There's a difference. 6 or 60 Muslim lads who came to the Archbishop when he was a missionary in Africa and wanted to be baptized. And he refused. Because he said, if I baptize you, the Muslims will riot, they'll slaughter all the Christians here, and so you'll have a problem there. And secondly, you already have the grace in you because you desire it. Now, obviously, because of the second, the first was tolerable. If he really believed that there was no way they could go to heaven except through baptism of water, he would have, said, fine, let them burn us out. The way they did, in the early church. All those, what do they call people? Begins with an M.
Martyrs?
That's the word.
Not martyrs.
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 Now, the problem is, I don't say that had I been in his place, I would have done any different. I'm sure I would have been as great a coward. I have no doubt. But you know what? I hope I would have had the sense not to boast about my cowardice later. I'd have been real quiet about it. I wouldn't have told a soul.
He wrote about it in his book.
He told it tons of times. I showed them. Yes.
In his letter to confused Catholics, he wrote it.
Well, he didn't write about the Muslims in there.
No, but it was a similar situation.
Similar situation. And you gotta wonder. This is not something to be proud of.
He denied baptism to quite a lot of people.
He did indeed, and this is not something I want to live with. But I will tell you this much. When you do, you see, it's an example of the same principle. Let us say, for the sake of argument, all right, that if baptism of desire existed, then yes, there would have been the lesser of 2 evils. But even under those conditions, I wouldn't boast about it. I wouldn't say, oh, look at this. When I was taking Latin, I had a very sweet little Latin teacher called Octavia, a little old Canadian lady. And she had me translate a Latin passage from the book. And I just started laughing my head off. And she said, Charles, what are you laughing at? I said, do you see what it says here? And she read it and she began to smile. And she said, okay, say it in English. I did, okay. Before great Caesar's very eyes, we fled and ran across the road. And I said, I could see this old Gaul telling his grandchildren, Caesar thought we were going to stand and fight. We showed him. Ran like rabbits. They couldn't catch us. No way, no how. Well, this isn't the sort of thing you should boast about. Certainly not to your grandchildren. Cowardice, sin of any sort, even if it's a lesser of 2 evils, is it something to be proud of? And that is what we as American Catholics have done. We're proud of our tolerance. We're proud of our cowardice. And this, I don't know, I don't consider it that admirable. My grandfather used to tell the story of the Battle of Tarnopol. And this was Russians and Austrians in the First World War. And I asked him, I said, Grandpa, what was it like at Tarnopol? And he said, Tarnopol, it was terrible. Lancers against Cossacks. Oh, We were separated from the main body of the regiment. The fortunes of war went against us, and there we were, 2 against 1,000. And I said to my subaltern, I said, we can in no way prevail against such odds. We must flee. So we fled, hotly pursued, 2 against 1,000. They chased us through marsh, through wood, through fen, through fields. Finally, 2 against 1,000, we came to a box canyon. We could go no further. We turned to face them, 2 against 1,000. And I was, of course, by this time, and I said, well, what happened then, Grandpa? He says, we got both of them. And, you know, being a Catholic is like that. I mean, so here we are, hotly pursued, 2 against 1,000. But so with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think our time has come to an end.
Yes.
But you've been a wonderful audience as always, and to you people out there in Radio Land, love and kisses. Now, why don't we be upstanding? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.
Amen.
St. Michael the Archangel, with us in battle, our
Protection against the malice and snares of the devil. God rebuke and we humbly pray. And do thou, Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan, evil spirits, roaming about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen.
The Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.